Hey, good morning. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting Paris Habitat today. Sorry, I'm going to do my talk in English because my Spanish is quite limited. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Bobo project. It's a project in Paris where we recover the heat from the underground to provide space heating for residential building. So very quickly, I will go through the context of the Paris Habitat and the climate strategy and the project itself. And quickly, the perspective, can we have other similar projects in Paris? So the global context, Paris Habitat, very quickly, that's a very old organization. It's more 1 century old. And it's a public utility company very closely linked to the City Council of Paris. And it operates in 3 main areas. One is renewing the city by building. We're building about 1,000 to 2,000 flats a year. And we also renovate and maintaining our existing properties. And all that is to provide accommodation for low-income households, so to provide social housing. And we also improve the community cohesion. So, as we said, we in the social housing sector, Paris Habitat is one of the largest actors in Paris and in France. We manage under 25,000 flats in Paris, and most of them are in Paris. In Paris, so there's the black dots, and some of them are just in the outskirts of Paris. So it's about 10% of all the Parisian flats, which represents a population of more than 300,000 residents. And we also got some business premises, some car parks, and some green areas, because our buildings very often have got some parks around it. Our patrimony is very diverse. We range from old buildings from the 18th to 19th century up to nowadays. And most of our patrimony is made of old buildings before 1948. And a third of it especially is the red brick buildings we can see here. So we got a big challenge of what to do with all these old buildings in Paris. The climate strategy, so as I said, we're very much linked to the Paris City Council. So here's very quickly the Paris City Council strategy with 2 landmarks, 2030, which the aim of reducing by 35% the energy consumption, and also reducing the carbon emission by 50%, the carbon footprint by 40%, which means also to use more renewable energy, about 45%, and also work on the air quality in Paris. And on a longer term, in 2050, Paris is aiming at being a city with 0 emission in Paris itself, reducing the carbon footprint of Paris by 80%, and the remaining 20% to compensate these emissions, and to also use 100% renewable energies. Of course, we can't produce 100% of the renewable energy in Paris itself, so we will need to use renewable energy also produced outside Paris, but the aim is to have at least 20% locally produced in Paris. So there's the last climate strategy. The first one was voted more than 10 years ago, and this one has been reviewed last year. And of course, it contributes to the IPCC recommendation to limit the climate change to 1.5 degrees. So Paris Habitat complies with the strategy, with the climate strategy of the City Council, and we certified our energy management by being ISO 50001 since 2016. That's been one of the largest perimeters to be certified in France. And our objectives are to save minus 35% of energy by 2030 compared to 2004, so that complies with the climate strategy of Paris. How do we do that? So all the new buildings are aiming at a consumption of 50 kilowatt-hour per square meter per year. When we renovate buildings, which is the main of the work, we aiming at a consumption between 80 to 100 kilowatt-hour per square meter per year. And also we include the energy efficiency in all the routine maintenance we do. We're also aiming at increasing the use of renewable energy in order all that to limit carbon emissions. And because we're in the social housing sector, we also pay a lot of attention to the bill which are paid by our tenants, because some of them have got quite limited income. So to come back to the projects, Beaubourg project. So I'm sure if you've been in Paris, you might have been to the Modern Art Museum, the Pompidou Museum. Whether we like or not the building is another story. So our building is just in front of the museum. That's an old building, built in 1930. It's 7 level high. It's managed by Paris Habitat since 2009. So as part of the buildings that Paris Habitat acquires and transform into social housing. Initially, that was for offices only. It's a bit more than 1,000 square meters. And the estimated energy consumption was 240 kilowatt-hour per square meter per year. So as you can see, it's very central in Paris. It's close to the Seine. So the aim each time we got this sort of buildings, we just take the opportunity of the extensive renovation we carry out to see what we can do to improve the energy efficiency. So here I put some pictures of the building during the renovation. As you can see, it's not that much left. We went back to the bare structure, and then all the other pictures of the building after the renovation. The aim was to transform the building into 20 flats, and first to work on the envelope of the building to reduce the heat need. So first there was some wall insulation, some roof insulation, changing the windows, the ventilation system that's more for the comfort and to reduce the humidity and control the airflow a bit better. And also to renovate the heat and hot water production, which is a central production in the cellar of the building. And it's a good opportunity to see whether we can use renewable energy when we do this extensive work. And the aim, as I said earlier, when we renovate for this building, that was to go to a consumption of 80 kilowatt-hour per square meter per year. So in the French regulation, when we talk about the energy consumption, the regulation excludes all the renewable energy produced on site, which is recovered on site. That's only the energy that we buy from an energy provider, which is counted. So which energy mix for the production? The idea was to use as much as renewable energy and wasted energy as we could. So first, we're lucky in Paris because we got quite a consequent urban heating network. So it's vapor produced as 50% from renewable energy, from wood and biogas, and also from recovered heat from the domestic waste incineration. So in Paris, we got several production sites, and then some pipes going through the city to the buildings to deliver the vapor. So this building was close to the urban heating network, so that was the first opportunity to use renewable energy and wasted energy. And then when the team arrived on site, they knew there was a tube going past, not very far. And then when I went to the cellar, they discovered that there were some steps going down. So sorry, it looks like it's raining or snowing. It's because it's like archive pictures and not very good quality. But we're in the cellar, and looking down, there are steps going down. And at the end of the steps, there is a door. And then behind the door, we got the tracks of the tube. So here is a cross-section. Here is the cellar of the building, the steps going down, and 10 meters down, you got the tube lines. So they thought, oh, maybe it's an opportunity to do something with it, because we got this tunnel. So what they thought about was for the space heating, to use a heat pump, air-to-water heat pump, and then to use a urban heating network, as I said. So the idea was very simple, is to use a tube as a cold source for the heat pump, then going to very standard heat pump unit, then producing hot water for heating up the building, and if needed, some additional heat from the urban heating network. And then for flats, so we also need hot water. And in that case, we decided to stay on a urban heating network. Why? Is because, as I said earlier, part of the heat is produced through incineration of domestic waste. And in the summer, the urban heating network is running 100% on this waste heat. And the idea is to encourage the use of the heat, otherwise the network wouldn't be able to get rid of this free heat. So the first step, as very often, wasn't that much technical, there was more some administrative discussion. We had to set up a partnership with the RATP. So the RATP, that's the company having in charge the exploitation of the public transport in Paris and outside Paris. So that includes the 16 tube lines of Paris. And they also got a climate strategy, so that's to reduce the energy consumption per passenger by 20% in 2025, and also to cut down the greenhouse gases emission by 50%. So when we talked to them about our building with this tunnel going to the lines, they were very interested because they thought there would be a test to also use for them in other stations and in other projects. So the contents of the agreements, we thought with the experience, so that was very important to clearly define right at the beginning the partnership and who does what and what's happening what happens if it goes wrong. So the object was to allow the air extraction from the tube. It was decided there was an experimental project, so there was no fee. The air would be free. Then the technical and economical feasibility study, everything with potential access to the tube tunnel, would there be a problem? The air filtration, as we know, the air in the tube is usually quite polluted. So do we need to filtrate the air or not? Would there be some airflow modification over time which could affect the function of the heat pump? And then some kind of physical measurement, temperature, hygrometry, dust. And then the usual feasibility study, like which heat pump, which size, which power. And so that I will come back to some points later, especially the main points, the air filtration and the temperature measurement. At the end, the airflow modification in a tunnel wasn't a problem. And also define clearly the limit of property. So it was decided that the RATP property would go up to the door on the track, and then the rest would be Paris Habitat. Then the work and maintenance to be carried out, who does what. So Paris Habitat will be in charge of installing the heat pump and everything which is down the steps, and the RATP will be in charge of closing the access to the track. Some security rules, the intrusion, because we're on the track and not very far from a station. Sometimes we got people on the track, so we didn't want anybody going through the building, through the tube tunnel. So the RATP did some masonry work by the door leading to the track and just leaving a trap for the air to go through. Then the fire security, of course, the RATP has got a strong regulation on it. So all the masonry on the track and also the steps I've shown you earlier was treated against fire. And we also put in place some fire dampers. So in case of fire, the air extraction is closed. Then we also got a problem in the tube in Paris, the floods, because the tube level is below the level of the last big flood 1 century ago in Paris. And very often with especially extreme events that we got more and more, the tube gets flooded. So it was decided to put a watertight door, which could be closed in case of floods, just by the tracks. So there was a RATP in charge of that. Then there was another question with noise and vibration from the tube, like if we open the door which leads to the track, would the noise from the tube could affect the building and people living above? At the end, there was no issue, no problem, some measurements were done. And also what we call the piston effect, when the tube goes past, it creates a pression, so with this pression, potentially create a higher speed in the plant room in the building, and at the end also there wasn't a problem. And it was also decided to be very clear and share the return of this experience and share the data with the RATP. So just to come back to two technical issues, the air filtration, the air is quite polluted in a tube. So what's important on this diagram is the blue and the blue and the red line. So the blue line has 10 micron particles, and the red line is the total amount of particles. So we can see that most of the dust in a tube is made of small, fine particles which are less than 10 microns, with a bit of a drop during the night and the weekend because there is less traffic and also less passengers, so the dust is less in the air. So it was decided to indeed use a filter to reduce the dust content. One hypothesis was made that the fine particles wouldn't affect the functioning of the heat pump, but we still needed to filter the air because we needed to meet the working regulation for the team looking after the plant room. And in France, the regulation is at 50 microgram per cubic meter per 24 hours, so we are far above that. So it was decided to use G-type filter, which was sufficient and cheaper than the higher performance one. So in reality, that looks like that. That's the door leading to the steps you've seen earlier. So that's about 2 square meters of filters. They can go to up to 5,000 cubic meters per hour. And it's quite efficient because it removes 100% of the fine particles at 10 microns and 90% of the 5 microns particles. And on the right here, on the picture, you can see that's the access to the plant room here. The other question was the temperature. How warm is the air in the tube? So the RATP did some measurements about a week in October. We got in blue the external temperature ranging from 4 degrees to 16 degrees. Then in yellow and black, that the temperature in the steps going to the tube. So we can see we're between 14 and 24. And in red, that the temperature in the plant room itself, about 24 degrees. So what's important was that we had an average temperature above 19 degrees. And it's also the difference between the external temperature and the tube temperature. We got at least 10 degrees. And with that, we estimated that we could improve the efficiency of the heat pump by 20 to 25% compared to just taking up the air straight from outside. So what did we install? I'm not going to go into detail into the diagram, but basically we find out the two main heat source. Here is the urban heating network. And on the other side, we got the heat pump. So the heat pump is warming up what comes back from the flat. So we're on the space heating distribution. Then it goes back to mixing tanks, where if needed, we got extra heat from the heating network. And then all that goes to the flats themselves. Very quickly, some characteristic for the heat pump which been installed. There's the Daikin heat pump, which is a very classical standard make. Power 27 kilowatts. The floor, the air goes to 10,000 cubic meter per hour. The water is a bit less than 4 cubic meter per hour. It's got a refrigerant fluid, the R407C. It can range from -10 to 24 for the air temperature, and for the water between 30 and 55. And because the building is quite well insulated, we don't need to have water for the space heating very high. Usually the water is between 30 and 40 degrees. And very quickly, for the heat exchanger for the urban heating network, we got 2 exchangers of 90 watt each. Then the key step is when everything has been installed is to have a good team for the exploitation of the heat plants. So at Paris Habitat, we got a contract with some companies specialized at running heating plants. On this project, that's a CRAM company, which has been on site since the delivery of the renovated building in 2014. One first step was to improve the regulation. So they introduced some balancing valves on a heat pump and a urban heating exchanger. They also added an additional controller in 2016 because for some reason, when it was installed, the heat pump was working only on and off. There was no modulation. It's important to be able to modulate the power of the heat pump and also to synchronize the heat pump with the supply coming from the heating network, and also to set up the temperature according to the exterior temperature. And doing all that, we were able to set up the priority to the heat pump. So very quickly, for example, here's a heat pump regulation. If it's 8 degrees outside, the heat pump delivers some water at 40 degrees. And then it goes back to the mixing tanks we've seen earlier. Some additional heat is injected if needed. And the valves to go into the flat, if it's 8 degrees outside, we need 36 degrees. So by having a temperature higher for the heat pump supply, we ensure that a consequent part of the heat comes from the heat pump and not from the heating network. Well, to come is still quite a lot of work to do to improve the system, and especially to have a more sensitive regulation, because the building is very well insulated, and we discovered that the valve installed are releasing too much heat into the heating, so we tend to overheat a little bit the building, and it's no good because we want to reduce the energy consumption. Some visions on top of that. The air supply. Of course, if the watertight door on a track is closed during flood events, or if some maintenance team close the door because they need to close it but then forget to reopen it, we don't have any air supply from the tube, so then the heat pump isn't working and we go to 100% heating network. So first very simple action was to put a sign on the door on a track to say, please leave the door open unless emergency. So very often I find that it's not a very technical challenge, it's more a human challenge to try to brief and communicate with all the teams involved in this sort of innovation project. Then the noise, we've seen there was no issue with the noise from the tube. But even if some precautions have been taken, we discovered that when the heat pump is functioning at full range, there was too much noise for the tenants living just above. So we had to reduce a bit the intensity of the operation, and then we have to see if we can improve the acoustic of the plant room on top of what's already been done to use more heat from the heat pump. And the air filtration, the dust is quite white, so it's quite difficult to see whether the filter is clogging up or not. But because there is a risk of clogging, then the exploitation team decided to change the filter every 6 months in order to have a sufficient airflow. Then the results, the energy balance, if we look at the monthly production, that's from 2015 to 2019. So the first month, the building was empty and I was ready to test the heat pump. So the production was very, very high, but unfortunately, with all the constraints we explained, we can't go that high when the building is occupied. Then we got some production, not all the time. So in blue, that's the urban heating network. In green, that's the heat pump. So we see that, unfortunately, in 2016, the heat pump was off, and also we had some flood events last year, where the door leading on the track was closed. The rest of the time, the heat pump is working fine during all the winter for the space heating. And we still have to improve the knowledge of the functioning of the heat pump. For example, why in February 2019 it was like about 50% covered by the heat pump, and with similar demand here in 2017 we had more covered by the heat pump. So talking to the exploitation team, so far they don't understand fully why and how they can improve it. I think maybe there is a slight variation in the air temperature in a tube, or maybe they can tune a bit better the valve to try to increase the proportion of the heat coming from the heat pump. But already it's working well, and they're very motivated, and they're very keen to improve the exploitation. And now if we look at the annual space heating need, on the left, we got the consumption of the building for the space heating in megawatt hour, and for 4 years, from 2015 to 2019. So in red, we got the total consumption. So 2015, that was before they put the extra controller, so obviously the building was overheated. Then in 2016, they put the controller, so the heating need went down, then carried on to go down in 2017, 2018. Also because the year was a bit warmer, but roughly we can estimate that we need about 60 megawatt hour per year for the space heating. Then in blue we got the urban heating network, and in green the heat pump production. So in 2016, we see for the heat pump production, we got a low point. That's because as the year was, the heat pump was off, unfortunately. But we see that we can't achieve about 20 megawatt hour a year by the heat pump. And if we look in percentage, the coverage is about 30%. And in 2019, so this year, I didn't put the total consumption because we're still missing November and December, which are winter months with a high consumption. But so far, from January to September 2019, the heat pump has been covered 44% of the space heating for the building. And for the environmental balance, we see that if we estimate about 20 megawatt hour per year being produced by the heat pump, we save 3 tons of CO2. One measurement we haven't done yet is the electricity consumption of the heat pump. They told me that I couldn't read the meter. There was no meter, so that would be something to improve to try to have a very global and exhaustive picture of the functioning of the heat pump. But so far, if we estimate the electricity consumption, we only emit 0.3 ton of CO2 per year. And the financial balance, the investment, so the heat pump and the filtration system costed 70,000 euro. As we said earlier, there was no fee for recovering the air from the tubes. The air is free. The annual savings for the last year, or the last 2 years, even if we had some shutdown periods, we estimate that we can save about a bit more than 1,000 euro a year, and the electric consumption would be a bill about 400 euro a year. So as we can see, financially, it's not a financial operation. If we do it, that's more for the environment, because the return on investment is very, very high. It's very long. So for us, the aim is to improve the regulation, the daily maintenance, to tune a bit better the heat we deliver, to reduce the heat consumption, to cover even more with the heat pump. We see that financially, that's not the operation we recommend for somebody who wants a quick return on investment. It's really more an environmental investment. And very quickly, the perspective, like we have other buildings in Paris with this sort of setup. So the aim, because it's quite expensive already, so we want to reduce the cost of the infrastructure. So we got two solutions, or we identify more tunnels, maybe there are more tunnels close to our buildings, or we take the opportunity of the extension of the tube lines in Paris. There are quite a few lines being extended over the next few years. So one of them is line 14, which is on a drawing, on a picture. So now we're negotiating with the RATP to see whether we could have some opportunities in the southern part of the extension. And the idea is to find existing buildings close to the future tube lines. So maybe during the work of for the extension of the tube, we could cut down the infrastructure to allow to the air to go from the tube to our buildings. But so far we're just discussing, and we see what the future will bring. And that's all what I have to say for today. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, pleasure.